I request Mr. Nilesh Shah to stay back on the dais. We move on to first panel discussion on future of resilient and Atmanirbhar board. I would like to welcome our esteemed moderator and panelists for the session to the dais. Our moderator for the session, Mr. Suhas Tuljapurkar, Co-Chairperson Governance Committee, Bombay Chamber and Founder Director Legasis. Our panel members, Mr. Nilesh Shah, President Bombay Chamber and Group President and Managing Director Kotak Mahindra AMC. Mr. Zarir Langrana, Executive Director and President Global Chemical Business, Tata Chemical Limited. Mr. M.S. Unnikrishnan, Head and CEO, IITB-Monash Research Academy. Mr. Manish Choksi, Vice Chairman, Asian Paints. I now request Mr. Tuljapurkar to begin with the session. Over to you, sir.
Just kind of brief introduction. I think Nilesh bhai, Unni, Zarir, Manish ji, thank you very much. I'm again requesting everybody to read out their bios on the digital space and not waste time. But I think each one of them has phenomenal experience of working at the board level and at various boards. And I think it's diverse in terms of what they do across, like for example, Manish ji works at startup ecosystem a lot. I mean, as having been there from an executive in Asian Paints, going up to the vice chairman of Asian Paints, and in his individual capacity working with startup ecosystem. So I think there is a phenomenal amount of experience that he has, which is very, very important for us to look at and share. Zarir actually is Tata Chemicals person. Besides being into the chemicals, I think he's always kind of looked at what is happening at the global level and how across the borders things work out. Thank you very much, Zarir, for joining us today. Of course, Unni, ex-managing director, CEO of Thermax and a very good friend. Today he runs at IIT Bombay and a joint venture with Monash University in terms of innovation, in terms of technology, and how do you commercialize technologies. Again, across various boards, he has phenomenal experience. I think Nilesh bhai doesn't need any introduction. I think he's been one of those stalwarts in the financial services sector who actually have paved way for many, many investments to happen in India. Thank you very much, Nilesh bhai. And I'm going to straight away start with saying, while we talk about resilient board, and sir, thank you very much for the discourse earlier today, which was saying that yes, it's resilient company being built up, but I think resilient boards and boards, the way they are acting today, at one level, there is a complete failure is what people say. That boards are not contributing to the companies at one level. By and large, at a global level, whenever we talk to people, people say that Indian boards are not effective. At the other level, we're talking about saying how does board pave way? And I think most of the companies today are wanting this board to play a very pivotal role. You see, as Professor Dr. Shrikant Datar would say, the governance function today is like a braking system in a car. If you don't have that braking system, you will not be able to accelerate. Now, in that kind of a complete, two ends, where do you see boards today, and what is the role of the board when we talk about resilience? Just opening remarks, Manish bhai, starting with you.
I think and good morning to everybody, and thank you to BCCI for this platform. I think when you look at boards, I think the traditional model was, like you mentioned, it's the braking function of the board. But then looking at sort of today's world, and you look at, electric cars, etc., the braking function of that car actually generates energy that puts back into the battery in some sense of words. And the boards will now have to change their posture from being gatekeepers to being actually, to begin with, facilitators, and maybe to some degree even provocators to do what you want to do in the future. And the only way to do that is to provide, I would say in some sense, the shield that companies and managements require to be able to develop these ideas. So I would look at boards as nurturing, and that is the shift that we will have to make. That is, gone is the notion that a board is a gatekeeper. They will say no and they'll only approve. Those kind of words seem to be part of some archaic vocabulary that we need to give up. Today we need to look at boards as saying that, they provocated, they gave you new ideas and they facilitated better growth. At the same time, we can't forget our past. And we will have to make sure that the governance, sustainability functions are sort of also well entrenched and well seen. So I think you'll have to change posture, change mindset, and that's what's going to take us forward.
Sure, thank you, Manish. Zarir?
So I think I would agree with Manish on that. And Suhas, I think the truth, like in many areas, lies somewhere in between, right? And certainly we've seen boards with different maturity levels across geographies, across regions, and across industry sectors. If you really want that board to work, to be nurturing, I think we need to introspect as board members and see, do we hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold management to? Do we have on the board sufficient diversity, sufficient freedom of expression, but most importantly, trust? Because board dynamics between board members and obviously between board and management is what's going to provide that focus that Dr. Mashelkar spoke about. How do we get those parallel lines and those rich parallel lines of experience coming together for a single-minded purpose?
No, thank you very much. Unni, your opening remarks?
Yeah, a very pertinent question that you asked about, and from my own personal experience, I serve on the board of a startup now, and I'm also serving on the board of a 100+ years old company. So same person when he goes into different kinds of boards, and I also serve on an NYSE listed company. So diverse in terms of the maturity level, complexity of operation. How I would say versatile is the board member in calibrating himself to adjust to that focus. Again, I go back to, I love that. I'm sure it's going to be there many talks of mine later. Ability to get them coagulate and come to a common point of thinking. Because the priority of each company is different. So somebody trying to be too individualistic on the board, which is also I've noticed that way, the change is the number one point. Second is, I've seen also in my own personal experience, 3-4 different types of boards, where people came in as friends of the promoter on the board, to where they came only for the board meetings. And I'm sorry to say many of them didn't even read the board papers. And their only fight with the CEO was that how can you reduce the 235 pages into 20 pages or 3 slides so that I can read it and come and help you out. To where today a company expects you to be contributing the minimum number of days that you're willing to be spending. And even an independent board member participating in a CXO-1 level selection to maybe mentoring the new people who are elevated. So the active involvement of the board members is a transformation that has happened. So in today's world and tomorrow's world, the way doctors put it across, a person remaining at 30,000 feet is no more a board member. You should have an ability, ambidextrity, to get into the operational understanding and immediately lift also to go to the 30,000, maybe not 30,000 anymore, space distance, kilometers above. And that kind of an ability is needed in the newer boards of the company. That's my first opening comment on that.
Thank you. Nilesh bhai?
So I'll just borrow from Kurukshetra. The board should be like Arjuna, like Krishna to the Arjuna. They should give the vision, give the purpose to the company, fight for the dharma, don't take small battles. Second, they have to give the governance. And third, they have to give the support or guidance where necessary. And if you see in Kurukshetra, when it was important to kill Karna, first kill the Karna and then tell Pandavas that he was your elder brother. don't tell before. So we want board to be aware that we are working in a real life, and there will be occasions where it's better to disclose certain things afterwards rather than before. So just
Thank
like
you.
Kurukshetra, provide guidance, vision and governance.
Thank you, Nilesh bhai. I think as a lawyer, I'm going to say also transparency needs to be there. So, no. But Nilesh bhai, I'm just going to kind of be with me on a couple of points. You know, as we all said, the VUCA factor is increasing like crazy. I think the volatility that we see today across, whether it is COVID, post-COVID Ukraine, what you alluded to in terms of Tibet, what's happening is, you see, I think about 3 days ago, the US government kind of came out with a law, which actually talked in a sense about giving a interest moratorium and subvention to aviation sector companies in the US. Okay. Now, similar thing is happening in China. You know, there is a 15-year moratorium that's being given, and I think still you will still be qualified, although you may be stressed. So, I think global developments that are coming up today are indicating that VUCA at all level is increasing. Therefore, competing with that scenario and being a person from financial services sector, that's precisely why I took the example of interest or interest subvention in the US as well as in China. How do we, Indians and Indian boards, today look at it, and how part of it is very important? Because what is it that at the board level you would want the companies and the directors to look out for in addressing these challenges? Because financial resilience is paramount, and I think.
So one, Suhas, by frankly speaking, our boards have done a fantastic job. Between subprime crisis in 2008 to COVID crisis today, corporate India is deleveraged. There are very few countries in the world where corporate have deleveraged. India is one exception. So I think by and large, if we look at the NPAs of Indian banks today, if you look at the financial resilience of Indian corporates today, we have done a far better job than the rest of the world. So we should continue what we have done. Now one can always argue that, oh, our guys didn't take enough risk. They could have borrowed more money. They could have invested. The private investment is on the back foot. Everyone knows that. But my feeling is that, this is marathon. If we miss a sprint of 100 meters, 1 kilometer, it's fine. We'll still be able to catch up. As a board, I think they have to balance the management in terms of growth. When things are too good, act as a brake. When things are too bad, act as an accelerator. And I think by and large, India Inc. has done a great job.
No, Nilesh bhai, how part is important? In a sense, if you were to look at the boards today and tell them what is one thing that they need to do, what would you say?
So be open for ideas and innovation.
Okay.
For example, I sat on the board of a textile mill where, unfortunately, India, you are not allowed to hedge cotton risks.
Correct.
Well, the option is then to go out and hedge it. Now, is it a perfect hedge? Answer is no. But can we create a near perfect hedge with some risk management? Answer is yes.
Okay.
There are many importers, exporters who believe in taking forward cover. Now, by and large, we have seen that forward covers generally underperform the spot market. Now, can you add options along with forwards to create a better payoff profile? Now, there is invariably slight increase in risk when you deviate from such things. But if the return trade-off is supporting it, you should do it. So my suggestion to the boards will be that please be open for ideas and innovation. Don't get restricted by this is the practice going on from beginning, and hence we will follow it.
Great, thank you very much. Unni, I think very clearly what's happening is, on one hand, we're talking about how do we kind of take advantage at a global level, whether it is deglobalization, whether it is moving away from China, all of that is happening. The fact still remains, and I think Mr. Sahani will bear with me. The key starting material to manufacture things today is simply not available in India. And that's one of the factors. That's one of the factors, and the volatility around that factor is going to change the entire equation when we're talking about Atmanirbhar. So in that context, what should the board be doing?
I'd say that the crisis situation of the type that you mentioned about the subventions equilibrium that had happened earlier will continue to be happening. And board cannot be again focused on one item alone. Short term, there are certain measures to be taken to ensure that the company survives, sustains, and perform. And long term should not be compromised. So the board role in this kind of VUCA situation, as you mentioned about, we are a better off country in my opinion because we don't have money to be subventing many things in this country. We have never done it. The Indian companies overcame 99 to 2002 crisis, 2008 global crisis, and COVID. Even prior to COVID, we were already in a near to crisis situation. We overcame all of that and today became again the fastest growing economy, whatever said and done. This is the learning of the Indian industry without having a government pocket full of money and then supporting you that way. So that is, I would say the Indian boards have also evolved in that capability. But I would say that, again going back to Marshall Curse, that what we invested in say 0.7% of the GDP in 1990s is helping you today in some other areas. So the board should be very clear that the companies have to survive for a long period of time. And there are short-term measures and long-term measures. That the ability to look at anything that is brought in by the CEO or advising the board, the company, where to focus for today and for the future is a kind of capability that we need to be creating among ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Zarir, coming to this issue, and I think not really, talking about climate change as a topic, but the fact, and today is the World Environment Day, and I think look at it from the point of view, when you are in a chemical industry, when you're talking about, let's say, are we at the board level focusing on issues such as green chemistry, circular economy? Forget the ESG or what Ashwath Damodaran talk about ESG being not there as the valuation proposition. But ESG, is it something where it's getting related to the ground level issues such as green chemistry?
So I think today, let's say compared to 5 years ago, there's an increasing realization, certainly in our sector, that ESG is here to stay. It's no longer a matter of debate. It's no longer a bolt-on strategy. It is core to the survival of the industry and to the survival of the sector. And the way we look at it is really on 3 broad buckets. One is the whole issue around decarbonization, right? Emissions, etc. The second is around circularity and building circular economies, circular processes, water stress and circularity around water. And the third is around biodiversity and preservation of natural resources. If you look at these 3 holistically, and I believe boards have started doing that, companies have started doing that, the challenge, I think, is not really with the large organizations in the sector today. The challenge is how do we as large players in the industry handhold the MSMEs on this journey? Because really today, certainly in this sector and in India, it's the MSMEs that make up 60% of the sector, right? And while they may be willing to start the journey, I think the willingness is there, the recognition is there. I think many of them stumble saying, where do I start and how do I move forward? Because let's be very clear, this is going to be an expensive journey, right? Let's not trivialize the scale and the amount of resources that need to be thrown at this, right? And when you look at it in terms of climate consciousness, certainly in terms of climate justice and equity, and the just transition that companies need to make, especially in hard-to-abate sectors, I think this continues to be a challenge, but the board needs to engage on this with management, not only to see what we can do within our own organizations, but how do we propel the industry along with us.
Thank you, Zarir, for that outline. I think, Manish ji, When we talk about the complexity of businesses today, and the businesses are becoming more and more complex, in that complexity, what and how should the board be reacting, acting, proacting, whichever way?
So I think when you look at the complexity and you look at governance standards that we've already evolved, the board function itself has been broken into various subcommittees, and I guess for companies that have large boards, it's important to use this fairly sort of paradigm of committees that would focus on various aspects of handling the kind of complexity that you're talking about. So if you look at risk management, there is a need to focus on that, and in risk management you can cover very diverse areas, from technologies that would disrupt the business to technologies that can negatively disrupt the business, such as not being compliant or not being sustainable in that manner. So you could cover under the various auspices and give direction at a very sort of, I would say, deeper level, engage with management at a deeper level, and then advise the rest of the board or recommend to the rest of the board on what should be the path that we take in some sense. So utilize the structure that is embedded in law and make it actually functioning rather than the tick marks that we probably were a decade or so ago. Earlier it was more like management presented risk mandate. You kind of did a check mark and you got out of that meeting in maybe 30, 45 minutes. We could use that same structure very disruptively to actually provide long-term guidance. Sometimes you need to do it like Nilesh said on strategy and vision, which I guess collectively the board does. But each of these subcommittees can provide, greater amount of vision, clarity to the direction you're going to take in each of these areas. Like the audit committee can do the same on, of course, financial and reporting standard, but also around, various areas of governance. And then nothing in our structure, prohibits the board from having other areas. Dr. Mashalkar talked about a subcommittee that, has been created to look at sustainability and green standards. If that is relevant to the company, there is no harm in using that. And I think we've also learned at Asian Paints that you should probably not overburden the governance structure with something a specialist can do. So we have a technical advisory board, which is, led by Dr. Shivram, who was a member of our board for, almost 17 years in that sense. But that does not have the shackles of, let's say, governance and the kind of board mandate that you would have, but advises us on future technology directions that we need to take, assuming consumer trades. So I think I would urge that within the construct, we have a lot of sort of mechanisms that were tick marks. Maybe they need to be made more robust and utilize those to actually provide the kind of guidance that we need to give to management, and as well as propel the company forward in a very different direction.
Thank you. Zarir, how do you deal with complexity at the board level? Because business is now becoming global and becoming more complex.
So I think, as Manish mentioned, in most cases, and I think certainly with large boards, risk assessment has moved from being merely a tick-in-the-box exercise that you do, every few board meetings, to becoming a much more live and constantly updated process, right? And arising out of that, I think more importantly is the playbooks that you create, right? And these playbooks need to address various scenarios that you draw out, right? This whole issue of scenario planning that Dr. Mashalkar talked about, I think is gained, certainly in our organization, gained extreme importance. And these scenarios and the playbooks that emanate out of these cover a whole gamut of areas. It can range from supply chain disruption, whether that supply chain disruption is because of a geopolitical issue, whether it's because of a health issue, whether it's because of interest rates, asymmetries across geographies. The issue is supply chain. The issue could be cybersecurity. What do you do in the case of a breach? And there are breaches of various kinds, and they don't need to be always handled in the same manner, right? So building these playbooks and then putting these playbooks into action through war gaming, scenario planning, whatever name you want to give to it, I think is becoming most important. And I think as the management builds this, I think the board needs to challenge, stress test, and in a manner be a counterweight to what management places.
Right. Thank you, Zarir. Unni, business complexities, how do you deal?
I think boards will have to be more creative in thinking, not in action, because business executives and the management will be deep entrenched into the business. So their ability to think beyond certain level. So one of the flaws that I have found as board members, including me, is that we depend a lot on the past by asking for a trend analysis. That's a fad normally which happens. So we're projecting the future from the past and avoiding to think about a disruption that can happen. I was just remembering the other day, maybe in the WhatsApp University, sometimes you gain knowledge also from there. One such knowledge which has come in the last few days is about, Netflix's main competition is what today? Sleep. Yeah, if you sleep, you don't see a film. Mercedes-Benz's main competition is what? It's a mutual fund SIP. Because the youngsters who can afford to buy a better car, he's enticed by people like them to put money into SIP. So your ability to be thinking laterally, counterintuitive, related to what is happening in the world. Now, this I don't expect the CEO of Mercedes-Benz to be thinking that way, or a Netflix CEO to be thinking that way. A board member who is expected to be having a view of a much different perspective, wider perspective, from a distance, should be able to advise them. So when you mention, I'm just trying to correlate what Zarir mentioned about the scenario planning is, not scenario planning is that if the interest were to go to 18%, what will happen to the company? It should be stupid to think that in India the interest will go to 18%. So look at things which are not in the normal way of thinking, which will happen. Because, see, business continuity is something already known to the people. And I'm sorry to say that in risk committees or companies, it's always what happened in the past, it will reappear another time with a certain amount of, up and down. How will you manage it? That the management knows already. You don't need the board to help them out. So this is the way I think the modern day board has got to be evolved, because the changes are so quick, so fast. And if you have thought about something which could never even be imagined to happen, then you may be having some preparation, not that you can be fully prepared to run a company. That is a different kind of an agility needed. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Nilesh bhai, I think there was a discussion some time back in terms of saying that the boards meet from quarter to quarter. How much amount of time does board members have? And I call this broadly QSQT, Qayamat se Qayamat tak, quarter se quarter tak. And in that scenario, you see, are you not expecting too much from every board member today? And they are only going to look at these paper and board packs which run into thousands and thousands of pages from quarter to quarter. And with businesses being complex, with VUCA multiplying, not only adding, and digital disruption moving by the day. I think one of the examples was in one board meeting we just talked about ChatGPT, and by the time next board meeting came in, everybody was on ChatGPT. They had used OpenAI, they talked about Genie, they talked about everything else. So between the two board meetings, world changed. What do you expect the board of directors, and how would you want them to be proactive?
Well, the board has to be like the coach. At the end of the day, it's the player who will have to go and play. And sometimes they'll play as per coaching, sometimes they will play not as per coaching. And when the player comes back, the coach will again portray or bring it to his or her attention that this is where you followed the rule, this is where you didn't. And by not following the rule, if you achieved a better result, fair enough, I'm willing to change my coaching. But if you're making a mistake consistently, then there is a need to revise it. I think the first starting point for the board will be to create competency among themselves. We want companies to be diverse, but our board also should be diverse. Second, you also need commitment. Yes, today regulators and rule book portrays thousands of pages at you. But then there's always 80-20 rule. This 20% is important, this 80% is not. Third, boards can also function via various committees whereby the work is delegated. And instead of each board member going through 1,000 pages, maybe the individual burden will be 50 or 75 or 100 pages, depending upon who is in audit, who is in risk, and so on and so forth. And most importantly, a good coach is one who can show the red card. How many boards will be willing to show the red card?
That's right.
I think the coach and the player relationship is true between board and the management.
Okay. Thank you, Nilesh bhai. Now, we're probably coming to the close, but one last thing which, sticking to the theme of the panel discussion. When we are talking about becoming Atmanirbhar, and that's kind of a vision of economy there, vision of self-reliance there. It embodies within it many elements and factors. And if we were as a country to move to become Atmanirbhar, right, building resilience of the board is an imperative. But how is the most critical part that based on your experiences I would want to understand? How does one get into becoming Atmanirbhar and what does the board need to do? Nilesh bhai, starting with you.
So Atmanirbharta doesn't mean becoming an island. Atmanirbharta essentially to me means you are protected in an interconnected world and you always have plan B. As long as I am protected in a changing world and I have a plan B for potentially bad scenarios, I think that's an Atmanirbhar company. And Atmanirbharta also means where my knowledge ends and where I should seek a help. I think if we achieve these two things, my feeling is that we are truly Atmanirbhar.
Okay, thank you. Unni?
Yeah. I would say that from being India-centric organizations, many Indian companies are going to become global in nature. And the board composition should be in such a way that people who are the board members should be able to understand the global geo-economics, geopolitics, and the ramification of that on the company where they're working on, number one. Second is for them to be growing, they should be able to accept various cultures, business practices, which are prevalent in the leading parts of the world, which will also be leading in the future. Confined to an Indian thinking, an Indian board, will make the company more Indian. So I would say it's a little contrary to what you would have expected as an answer. That should I would rather say that why would I not invite an international director onto the board of my company? Rather than, training an Indian for that. But in any case, I would say training is needed for every Indian independent director to be global in thinking, global in inclusion in various factors. And knowledge, not this Indian knowledge. It has got to be across the globe related. That's the way we can become really Atmanirbhar.
Thank you. Zarir?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Nilesh and Unni said in terms of, I think what's important is obviously board composition and a constant look at board composition to make sure you've got the right level of diversity in there, the right level of thought leadership. But more importantly, I think in a world where things are changing with increasing frequency and amplitude both, I think staying on top of what really matters, staying on top of new trends becomes extremely important. And that then goes back to continuous upskilling and reskilling of the board. Just like we upskill and reskill within organizations and management, I think it becomes more important to do it at the board level now.
Okay, thank you. Manish ji?
Just continuing the same thought that has been there here, I think looking at long-term trends, not only from an intrinsic technology change perspective, but also from a consumer perspective. I think all of us need to understand that global trends tend to now, move rapidly. And is the board capable of taking that kind of input? And thus comes in the variety that as we look at a decade of, sort of change of independent directors coming up, is this an opportunity to sort of recompose your board in a manner that would lead you into a future direction? and that would take into account some of the trends that we are seeing that are going to be there as mainstreams, going forward. So use this sort of discontinuity as you would have it to be able to equip the board that they are going to be able to give the kind of input that the company and the management will require for the future. I think the other big thing is all about who takes the initiative on direction of the company. I think this is the place where there was a different paradigm earlier where promoters played that role, whereas you will probably have to evolve a bit of a partnership model here where owners, promoters, management, and the independent board members will kind of have to forge a partnership if you're going to really get away, because we require that diverse view to be able to sharpen the future.
No, thank you very much. And I think I'm going to do one last round of only one aspect, and the final one being, I think one of the critical areas is how do you build the trust? And I think, sir, you talked about it in your presentation. Ethics are important, tick the box is not really enough. You got to look at ethics in a different manner, and therefore you got to look at building that trust. So starting from you, Manish ji, one factor, one element, one action at the board level, how do you demonstrate that trust factor being brought in?
For me, I think COVID as a disruptor for the board was the fact that we moved digital. It kind of, in many sense, broke some of the personal connections that you need to have amongst board members. I think we need to find a way to be able to re-establish that, even as the world is moving much faster in that sense of the word. So a lot of dialogue, informal, both formal, outside of just the board and the board topics. How do we as a board facilitate that, I think is super critical, because we need to understand the perspectives of where people come from so that we can kind of put that convex lens that Doctor talked about and really bring a sharper focus in that sense of the word. So I would say that, the board agenda could be a factor, but I think there is an informal getting to know agenda which is extremely important, and their convergence is more important than even on, focusing on the topics.
Thank you. Zarir?
I think very clearly keep your lines of communication open.
Okay.
Not just within the board, but with all stakeholders, including management. And it could be something as simple as, where do we hold our board meetings?
Okay.
Is it in the sterile environments of a boardroom? Or do we go to plants? Do we go to our R&D centers?
Well said.
Do we do it in our innovation centers? Do we even go and perhaps request a large customer saying, can we do an away day with you?
Wow.
Can we do a board retreat with you?
Great. Thank you. Unni?
Excellent, Zarir.
Yeah.
Good learning. Yeah, I would say that how do you build trust? It's based on the consistency of behavior of others. So if the management of the organization is consistent, you can't trust a person overnight. That'd be blind faith. No, I'm talking about a different kind of a thing. So if you feel that the management and the promoters, two of the other stakeholders, are consistent in whatever they are discussing with you, disclosing with you, including what you mentioned about number one is that one. Second is you can also make out if an organization has got a higher level of delegation of authority, right from the promoter to the CEO to the rest of the people, and reverse also happening, that means a trustworthy organization. So these are the two facets which you can indicate. One can talk a lot more, but these are the two which I do feel.
Thank you. Nilesh bhai?
I mean, apart from what everyone mentioned, trust is transparency.
Okay.
As long as I'm transparent to my stakeholders, trust will be there. And it's conduct, I have to be better tomorrow than what I am today.
Okay. Now, if that is the transparency, then do you tell Karna, or do you tell Pandavas that Karna was their elder brother? On a lighter note. However, thank you very much. I mean, it has been an honor, pleasure, and privilege to be moderating this panel discussion. Please give a round of applause to all the panel members. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Nilesh, Unni, Zarir, Manish ji. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank our speakers for thought-provoking deliberation at the panel discussion. Now I would like to invite Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar to present the mementos to our speaker. To Mr. Nilesh Shah, Mashelkar sir क्या है? No, yeah. To Mr. Zarir Langrana. To Mr. Unnikrishnan. To Mr. Choksi. And our moderator, Mr. Suhas Tuljapurkar. I request Mr. Mashelkar, President. I request Dr. Mashelkar, President, Senior Vice President, all the speakers to join us for the group photograph. Speakers from other panel discussion also can join for this group photograph.
One row here and I think this will be enough.